They left the city just after noon. A couple in their early 30s, smiling in the front seat of a silver SUV as it merged onto the freeway heading north. They had reserved a cabin near the lake, something quiet tucked away in the forest. Just the two of them. No friends. No distractions. A weekend to reconnect. It was supposed to be a reset. A pause from the noise of everyday life. Just a man and his wife, surrounded by snow-covered trees and a crackling fire. But by Monday morning she was gone. He made the call around 7:43 a.m. Said she'd gone for a walk and never came back. That's what he told the operator, his voice calm, steady. Said he waited, maybe she got lost and maybe her phone had died. But no one ever saw her alive again. What followed wasn't a rescue. It wasn't even a search. It became something else entirely, an effort not to find someone alive, but to figure out how she disappeared in the first place. And why her husband's story kept shifting. There were no signs of forced entry. No struggle. Just a few footprints outside the cabin, leading into the woods. The snow fell hard that weekend, enough to bury mistakes, cover evidence, and wipe clean anything that came before. But it didn't hide everything. And when investigators looked closer, they found answers in places he thought no one would ever check. This is the story of a romantic weekend that ended in murder. Welcome to True Crime Dossier, where we examine the darkest truths hiding within everyday lives. In each episode, we take you beyond the headlines and into the core of real cases that left families shattered and communities searching for answers. Today we bring you the case of a couple whose weekend getaway ended with a missing persons report, a growing list of unanswered questions, and a confession that shocked those who knew them best. They arrived as husband and wife, both successful, both well-liked, and both expected to return home that Sunday. Only one of them did. What followed wasn't just a story of loss. It became a case that would expose infidelity, manipulation, and a calculated act that took place far from city streets and surveillance cameras. This is the case of Leah and Daniel Warren. A weekend away. A body in the snow. And a truth that refused to stay buried. Leah Warren was 32 years old. A marketing executive with a reputation for excellence, she'd built her career from the ground up. Her colleagues described her as sharp, organized, and someone who could light up a room without trying to. She had a core group of friends who she spoke to daily, women she'd known since college, women who'd seen her through everything, including her marriage to Daniel. Daniel Warren was 35. He worked in financial planning and managed a small team at a mid-sized firm downtown. Clean-cut, confident, and easy to talk to. Friends often referred to him as solid, the kind of man who didn't make waves. He was dependable. The guy who never forgot a birthday, who showed up early, who made people feel like they could count on him. They met 7 years earlier at a mutual friend's engagement party in Austin, Texas. Leah had just landed a new job. Daniel had recently purchased his first home. Their first conversation lasted nearly an hour, and according to Leah's best friend, she called the next morning and said, "I think I met someone different this time." For the first few years, things seemed steady. They took trips together, hosted holidays, shared a joint Instagram account filled with photos from wine tastings, hiking trails, and dinner dates. To the outside world, they were the image of stability. They looked comfortable. They looked aligned. They looked happy. But by the end of their 6th year together, something had changed. Leah's friends noticed that she'd become more reserved. She started turning down weekend brunches and wasn't as active in their group chats. At work, she kept performing, but her mood was different. More focused, more private. There were no public signs of trouble. No arguments posted online. No shouting matches in public. But her absence from social circles was starting to feel like a pattern. In the months leading up to the trip, Leah had spoken vaguely about needing space. She told a coworker she was exhausted from pretending. She didn't go into details, but the implication was there. Something in the marriage wasn't working. Still, she never said anything concrete. No admissions. No direct accusations. Just hints. The weekend away had been Daniel's idea. He found a cabin through a private rental site, 2 hours outside of Denver, surrounded by forest, with a fireplace, a large deck, and enough room for just the two of them. According to the rental owner, Daniel booked it 2 weeks in advance. He requested privacy and asked that no one check in during their stay unless contacted. Leah's colleagues remembered her mentioning the trip casually. She said they were trying to reconnect. That it was supposed to be a clean break from distractions, a chance to talk without interference. She left the office early Friday afternoon and told her assistant she'd be offline until Monday. She was never seen again. The area they stayed in was remote. Limited cell service. No nearby neighbors. The closest store was a gas station 11 miles away. Heavy snow was expected that weekend, and by Saturday evening the storm had begun. Roads were difficult to navigate. Even emergency vehicles would have struggled to get through quickly. Friends grew concerned when Leah didn't return messages by Sunday evening. By Monday morning she still hadn't logged into her work accounts. That's when the first call came in, not from her but from Daniel. He told police his wife had gone for a walk early that morning and hadn't returned. That he waited. That he looked for her. That he finally called when it became clear she wasn't coming back on her own. The responding officers noted that Daniel seemed composed, calm even. He led them through the cabin, pointed to the trail she had supposedly taken, and mentioned that she liked walking in the mornings. According to him, she brought her phone but left her coat behind. Leah's friends didn't buy it. She was cautious. She hated the cold. She had once canceled a weekend hike because the weather dropped below freezing. The idea that she'd step out into snow-covered woods alone, unprepared, didn't match the woman they knew. Within hours, local volunteers and officers were searching the area. Dogs were brought in. A drone was flown over the property. It was difficult. Visibility was low, the snowfall had covered most of the ground. But there were traces. In the cabin's guest bedroom, an officer noticed something odd. The bedding had been stripped and the mattress was damp. A trash bag sat in the corner of the room, tied shut. When they opened it, they found clothes, women's clothes, some of them stained. Daniel said he had done laundry. That she had spilled wine. That it meant nothing. But the inconsistencies were growing. What had started as a missing persons case was shifting. The longer they stayed at the cabin, the less sense Daniel's version of events made. They left Denver just after lunch. The roads were clear at first, but the forecast warned of heavy snow moving in overnight. Daniel drove while Leah navigated. According to the timestamp on the last photo she sent to a friend, they stopped for gas around 2:11 p.m. at a station just outside Golden, Colorado. She was smiling. Wrapped in a dark green scarf. Holding coffee. They arrived at the cabin shortly before 4:30 p.m. The place Daniel had booked was remote, nearly 12 miles from the nearest highway. Tall pine trees surrounded the property. The gravel road leading in was narrow and uneven, with just enough space for one vehicle. The cabin itself sat back from the road, barely visible from the tree line. A wraparound porch. One main bedroom. One guest room. A small kitchen. A wood-burning fireplace. There was no cell service at the cabin. No landline either. The rental owner had informed Daniel about that in advance. If they needed anything, there was a general store at the base of the hill with an old payphone out front. That was nearly a 30-minute walk away, downhill in good weather. According to Daniel, they spent the first night watching a movie on his laptop and drinking red wine. He said Leah was tired. That she went to bed early. He stayed up a little longer, played a few rounds of chess on his phone, then joined her. By morning she was gone. Daniel said he woke up just after 7 a.m. and noticed the bed was empty. He checked the bathroom. The kitchen. Called out her name. Thought maybe she'd gone for a walk. She liked the quiet early hours, he said. Liked to clear her head. But by 8:15 she hadn't returned. According to the 911 transcript, his voice was calm as he explained the situation. Said he didn't want to overreact but that something didn't feel right. The first deputy arrived at 9:41 a.m. Visibility was already dropping. The snow hadn't stopped since the night before. Most of the property was blanketed in white, fresh and undisturbed. There were no recent tire tracks, no signs of forced entry, no signs that anyone else had come near the cabin. Inside, the living room was tidy. 2 wine glasses sat near the fireplace. One still had liquid in it. On the kitchen counter was Leah's phone, powered off. Her coat and boots were still by the door. Daniel said she left in her sweatshirt and joggers, wearing only her house slippers. He told them it wasn't unusual, that she often walked without gear. But the weather was harsh, windy, freezing. Officers on scene noted that it would have been uncomfortable to step outside for more than a few minutes without proper clothing. As the search team expanded the perimeter, they began looking for any trace of movement. Footprints, broken branches, impressions in the snow. At first, nothing stood out. But as they approached the edge of the tree line about 75 yards from the cabin, one of the dogs signaled. It was faint, just a depression in the snow, partially covered by fresh snowfall. Beneath it, frozen soil. Something solid. A portion of fabric. And what looked like hair. They called in the crime scene unit. By midday the area was sealed off. What had started as a missing persons search was now classified differently. The coroner arrived before sunset. The medical examiner later confirmed the identity as Leah Warren. She had been buried in a shallow trench roughly 3 feet deep. Her injuries were consistent with blunt force trauma. No defensive wounds were found on her hands or arms. There were signs of compression on her neck. Her wrists showed faint ligature marks. The discovery shifted everything. Detectives asked Daniel to remain on the property. He cooperated, answered questions, stayed calm, kept to his story. He maintained that Leah left the cabin that morning alive. That he had no idea how she ended up buried in the woods behind their rental. But inconsistencies were beginning to surface. The guest room's bedding had been stripped. The mattress was damp. A plastic bag containing women's clothing, leggings, a sweater, a pair of socks, was found beneath the bathroom sink. One of the items had bloodstains. In the kitchen trash, investigators found a used towel with red smears on it. Daniel said it was from cleaning wine. But forensic testing would later prove otherwise. The laptop he'd used the night before was powered off and hidden in the back of a kitchen cabinet. When examined, it showed recent search history entries, including a local weather forecast, first aid guides, and one peculiar search phrase, "How long to walk a mile in snow-covered forest?" There was no sign of forced entry. No indication anyone else had been present. The only footprints surrounding the trench where Leah had been found were consistent with Daniel's shoe size. When detectives questioned him again about the morning of her disappearance, he hesitated. First he said he'd stayed in the cabin. Then he admitted he might have walked outside to smoke. When asked what direction he walked, he couldn't say for sure. The silence from Leah's phone, left behind on the counter, spoke louder than anything else. She hadn't gone for a walk. She hadn't messaged a friend. She hadn't called for help. Her last known location was the cabin. Her last known action was arriving there with the man she trusted most. What investigators discovered in the woods changed everything. The discovery of Leah Warren's body behind the rental cabin forced investigators to reassess everything Daniel Warren had told them in those first few hours. What began as a missing persons report had turned into a homicide investigation, and Daniel, the last person to see her alive, was now the center of it. Detectives conducted their initial interview with Daniel inside the cabin. He sat calmly on a wooden chair near the fireplace, hands clasped, answering every question. According to the transcript, he repeated the same story he had given earlier. Leah went out for a walk just after sunrise. He stayed inside. Waited. Thought she might return. After more than an hour, he called for help. He didn't stammer. He didn't hesitate. His delivery was smooth, steady, and unwavering. That, in itself, was the first red flag. Most people in the early moments of a spouse's disappearance fluctuate between panic and confusion. Their memory of exact times tends to shift. Their stories evolve with emotion. Daniel's didn't. While the forensics team examined the scene, a separate unit began reviewing nearby surveillance footage. The nearest property with a working outdoor camera was the gas station Leah and Daniel had stopped at on their way in. Footage from that afternoon showed them pulling up to pump 4. Leah stepped out first, walked inside, and returned with coffee and a small bag of snacks. Daniel never exited the vehicle. Nothing in the footage suggested distress. No argument. No suspicious gestures. But what stood out was what she bought. Only one coffee, one bag of chips. In every other trip, friends later said she always bought 2. This time she didn't. It was a small detail, but one that hinted at emotional distance. That, paired with private text messages recovered from her phone, began to widen the scope of the investigation. Even though Leah's phone had been left behind in the cabin, investigators recovered her iCloud data with assistance from her carrier. The last message she sent was at 9:27 p.m. the night before her death. It read, "We'll talk when I get back. Please stop texting me for now." The recipient was a contact labeled MT. He would later be identified as her co-worker, Matthew Torres. They had been exchanging messages for nearly 2 months. Friendly at first, increasingly personal as time went on. The tone had shifted recently. The messages had taken a romantic turn. It wasn't concrete proof of an affair, but it opened the door to motive. Meanwhile, the search team continued examining the cabin and surrounding area. The interior showed minimal disruption. No signs of a struggle, no broken objects, no overturned furniture. But the guest bedroom remained a point of concern. The mattress was still slightly wet when officers arrived. A forensic specialist used luminol testing on the fabric and found evidence of blood, most of which had been wiped away. Beneath the bed, they discovered a small towel with 2 distinct stains, later confirmed to contain Leah's DNA. In the trash bin beneath the bathroom sink was a makeup bag containing foundation, mascara, a hairbrush, and a pair of tweezers. At the bottom of the bag were fibers and what appeared to be a small shard of a broken fingernail. Further analysis showed the nail was partially fractured, consistent with being bent backward under force. Daniel had claimed Leah walked off without warning, that they didn't argue, that the night before had been normal. Yet the evidence inside that cabin suggested something else, something physical, something that didn't align with his version of events. Investigators took possession of Daniel's devices the same day Leah's body was recovered. His phone, laptop, and smartwatch were all submitted for forensic analysis. On his phone they found recent deleted browser history. Some of the searches included: how deep does snow need to be to cover footprints? Blunt trauma versus suffocation injuries. Cabin rental privacy policies. Can deleted messages be recovered from an iPhone? On his laptop, investigators found a document in the recycling bin titled Untitled Note 2. When recovered, the file contained a string of phrases copied from various legal websites. Phrases like temporary insanity defense, accidental death versus manslaughter, and self-defense when provoked. The date of last modification was 3 days before the trip. Daniel had deleted several messages exchanged with a contact saved as Bren. In them, he referred to Leah as distant, said she wasn't the same lately, and hinted that the trip was a last chance to fix things. The final message before the deletion read, "If this doesn't change things, I don't know what will." Authorities obtained search warrants for Daniel's email accounts. One of his deleted emails, retrieved from the server, included a request to the cabin rental owner from 2 weeks before the trip. He asked if there were any properties farther from the road, specifically ones with limited public visibility. When asked about this in a follow-up interview, Daniel claimed he was looking for a place to fully disconnect. A chance to have privacy. Investigators documented the response but pressed no further during that meeting. They weren't ready to tip their hand. The forensic team continued to comb the area where Leah had been buried. Impressions in the frozen ground indicated that a tool had been used, a shovel or similar object. But the cabin inventory didn't include one. A receipt found in Daniel's vehicle, however, showed a purchase from a hardware store 2 days before the trip. On the list, gloves, plastic sheeting, bleach, and a folding shovel. That receipt would become a central piece of evidence in the prosecution's timeline. There was still one final step: retracing Daniel's movements the morning Leah was reported missing. While the cabin had no cameras, the general store down the hill did. At 8:56 a.m., roughly an hour after Daniel claimed Leah disappeared, he appeared on camera, entering the store in a gray hoodie and snow-covered boots. He bought a bottle of water, a protein bar, and a pair of work gloves. The clerk later said he looked tired but normal. He didn't mention anything about a missing person. Didn't ask for help. Didn't request to use the phone. This visit was never mentioned in his initial statement to police. When investigators confronted him with this detail, he said he forgot. That he had gone to clear his head. That he didn't think it mattered. It did. The inconsistency placed him away from the cabin at a critical moment. It challenged his entire timeline. The search teams were now confident that Leah had not wandered off, that she hadn't vanished in the early morning fog. She had been harmed inside the cabin. Buried. Every step Daniel took had been tracked. The physical evidence told one story. His words told another. As investigators sifted through the evidence, a central question began to emerge. Was this a sudden outburst? Or had it been building toward something much colder? Friends of Leah described a shift in her demeanor months before the trip. She had grown distant, yes, but not in the way people do when they're simply busy. Her messages became shorter. Her voice, when she answered calls, sounded cautious, filtered. She had stopped sharing the kind of details she once used to confide so freely. One friend said, it wasn't just that she was tired. It was like she was waiting for the right time to make a decision. Something was weighing on her. When detectives looked further into Leah's correspondence, especially her texts with Matthew Torres, more questions surfaced. Their conversations were undeniably personal. There were shared complaints about work stress, jokes that only made sense to the two of them, and eventually, exchanges about emotional support. Leah had written to him 1 week before the trip, "I can't do this much longer. I keep telling myself to wait until after the cabin, but every time he talks I just feel trapped." She never specified what she meant by "do this," but the implication was strong. She was preparing for change. Whether it was separation or confrontation remains unclear. But she was not in that marriage the way Daniel appeared to believe she was. Daniel's messages, in contrast, hinted at pressure. He had expressed frustration to his friend Bren, saying Leah didn't respect him anymore. That she had become cold, that she looked through him. In one message he said, "If she walks away, she's walking away with everything. House, accounts. She's holding all the cards." That line raised a flag for detectives. Daniel had recently moved money into a separate checking account without informing Leah. Financial records showed the transfer was made on the Wednesday before they left for the cabin. When asked about it later, he said it was routine. These details point to motive, but the nature of that motive remained in question. Was this a spontaneous reaction brought on by a heated argument? Or was the entire trip meant to isolate her from the support system she relied on, far from friends, phones, and help? Several key elements in the timeline suggest planning. The cabin booking, made 2 weeks before the trip. Not unusual on its own, but Daniel requested specific details about seclusion and accessibility. The hardware store purchase, gloves, bleach, plastic sheeting, and a folding shovel. The deleted searches, conducted days before the trip. But what's still debated, even now, is whether Daniel had intended to kill her when they arrived, or whether something escalated in that cabin that he didn't anticipate. The autopsy confirmed signs of struggle, but not a prolonged one. Leah had blunt force injuries consistent with being struck on the left side of the head. There were also signs of neck compression. The lack of defensive wounds could mean she never saw it coming, or she had simply stopped fighting. Experts brought in during the trial debated this point. One suggested that the injuries indicated a single violent episode. Another claimed the burial site and the items used to conceal the body reflected planning. What complicates the theory of premeditation is Leah's final message to Matthew Torres: "Please stop texting me for now." If she feared for her safety, why not reach out for help? If she believed Daniel could harm her, why go at all? Those closest to her believe she underestimated him. That she thought the trip would be uncomfortable, tense, and maybe even emotional, but not deadly. On the other hand, some believe Leah never intended to return to Denver as Daniel's wife. That she was planning to use the trip to confront him, or at least say things that had been left unsaid for too long. One friend said she had seen a note Leah had drafted but never sent. It read, "I don't love you anymore. I want to leave before I start to hate you." That note was never found. There were no signs that Leah had told Daniel about the emotional connection she had with Matthew. But whether she said it outright, or whether Daniel discovered the truth through her phone, or her mood, or the quiet way she had started pulling away, remains speculation. Daniel maintained that the night before was normal. He said they drank wine, watched a movie, and slept beside each other. But the evidence in the guest bedroom, especially the blood-stained towel, the stripped bed, and the bag of clothes hidden under the sink, points elsewhere. The prosecution later argued that Leah had not been killed in the main bedroom, but in the guest room. They presented this as proof that the couple had slept separately, further challenging Daniel's claim of a peaceful night. For viewers of this case, the questions still linger. Was this a crime of passion, committed in a moment of rage when Leah said something Daniel couldn't handle? Or had he planned to silence her before she had the chance to walk away on her terms? Was the trip a last effort to save the marriage, or to end it? There were no other suspects. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of a third party. The crime was not random. It was intimate, personal, and final. Daniel was the only one with her during those final hours. The only one who knew what was said. The only one who knew how it ended. 3 days after Leah Warren's body was found, Daniel Warren was brought in for a formal interview at the county sheriff's department. By this time, the search had shifted fully into a criminal investigation. The data from his devices had been analyzed. Forensic testing from the cabin was complete. Timelines had been constructed and reviewed. What remained was his version of events, against what the evidence already showed. The interview took place in a standard room. 1 table, 3 chairs, and a mounted camera in the corner. Detectives had a plan. Present inconsistencies one by one. Observe his response. Document everything. They began with the morning Leah disappeared. Daniel repeated the same account he'd given before. She left early for a walk. You stayed inside. Waited. Called when she didn't return. The lead detective placed a photo on the table. It was a still from the general store's security footage. Daniel walking in alone. The timestamp showed it was just under an hour after he claimed to have realized Leah was missing. He hadn't mentioned the trip. Hadn't asked for help. Hadn't used the phone outside. When asked about the visit, Daniel paused. He said he went to clear his mind. That he forgot to mention it because he didn't think it was important. The detectives didn't respond right away. Instead, they placed a second item on the table. a printed receipt from the hardware store showing the purchase of a folding shovel, gloves, bleach and plastic sheeting. Daniel said the bleach was for cleaning the bathroom. The shovel, he claimed, was for car emergencies. Next, they brought out a folder with stills from Leah's phone records, showing the final message to her co-worker Matthew Torres, and the data logs from Daniel's laptop searches. How to cover footprints in snow, what happens to blood in freezing temperatures, self-defense when provoked. He didn't deny the searches. He said he'd been watching crime shows. Called it curiosity. Finally, they presented the forensic report showing that Leah's blood had been found on the mattress in the guest bedroom, and on a towel that had been hidden beneath the sink. The room went quiet. The detectives stopped asking questions. They let the silence do the rest. After 12 minutes, Daniel spoke. His voice dropped. He said they argued that night. That Leah told him she didn't love him anymore. That she had found someone else. He claimed he lost control. He said it wasn't planned. That he had blacked out and couldn't remember how it started, only that it ended with her not moving. There was no mention of regret. No request to speak to her family. Just a cold outline of what came after. He panicked, moved her body and waited until morning. Daniel was arrested at 4:46 p.m. that day. The official charge was second-degree murder. The evidence supported a case of deliberate harm. Prosecutors argued that the act, while possibly triggered by emotion, had been anticipated. The materials purchased, the search history, the attempt to hide the body, all of it pointed toward intent. The trial began 6 months later in a packed courtroom. Leah's family sat quietly in the front row. Her mother, Evelyn, kept a framed photo of Leah in her lap every day. Her father sat beside her, staring forward, expression fixed. The prosecution began with the digital evidence. Deleted searches, messages between Leah and Matthew, and the financial transfer Daniel had made before the trip. They walked the jury through the cabin layout, using crime scene photos to explain the probable sequence of events. They didn't sensationalize the injuries. They stuck to the facts. Blunt trauma. Lack of defensive wounds. Signs of suffocation. Daniel's defense team argued that the event was spontaneous. That there was no proof of long-term planning. They referenced his cooperation with police, his consistent account, up until the point he confessed. But the prosecution responded with this. Consistency doesn't equal truth. His story didn't match the physical evidence. It didn't explain the items purchased. It didn't explain the towel, the shovel, or the lie about going to the store. The most emotional moment came when Leah's mother took the stand. She didn't speak about the evidence. She spoke about her daughter. The way she laughed when she got nervous. Her habit of humming while reading. Her dream of opening a nonprofit for young women in tech. She talked about the last voicemail Leah had left her, just 2 days before the trip, saying she would call once they got home and that they should plan a family dinner. When asked what she missed most, Evelyn paused. Her voice cracked. She said, "She was the only person who knew how to comfort me when I couldn't speak. Now I have no words left for the days without her." The court went silent. Even the judge took a moment before continuing. Daniel never took the stand. He sat still for most of the trial, expressionless, occasionally scribbling notes to his attorneys. After 10 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for 6 hours. He was found guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no outburst in the courtroom. No shouting. No applause. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that follows something irreversible. After the verdict, Evelyn Warren addressed the court one last time. She said she did not forgive Daniel, not yet. But she hoped one day she might. Not for him. For herself. She said grief had taken everything, but it wouldn't take her future too. Daniel was transferred to a maximum security facility 2 weeks later. He is currently serving his sentence with no appeals pending. Leah's co-workers created a scholarship in her name. Her friends still keep the group chat active. Her mother wears her daughter's ring on a chain around her neck. Justice came. But it came to a family that never asked for this story. To a mother who still checks her voicemail. To a friend who still types messages she'll never send. Leah Warren thought the weekend would bring clarity. Whether it was meant to heal their marriage or end it, she was willing to go. Willing to listen. Willing to speak. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that her trust would be the very thing that put her in danger. She entered that cabin with the man she once chose to build a life with. A man she defended for years. A man she tried to reason with, even as she drifted further away. He saw the distance, but instead of accepting it, he tried to erase it by force. This wasn't about a single argument. It wasn't about one bad decision. It was about control. About fear of abandonment. About someone who believed he had more to lose by letting her go than by keeping her forever silent. Jealousy doesn't always arrive with yelling. Control doesn't always look like rage. Sometimes, it presents itself as persistence. As reason. As just one more chance. Leah's friend said she wasn't scared, she was just exhausted. Tired of the same cycles. Tired of walking on eggshells. Still she went. She gave him that weekend. She gave him space to speak. He chose silence. Then he chose violence. She trusted him with her life, and it cost her everything. Her story forces us to ask difficult questions. How do you recognize when someone's affection has turned into surveillance? How do you walk away when you feel obligated to stay kind, to be fair, and to offer closure? These questions don't come with easy answers. Leah wasn't weak. She wasn't careless. She didn't ignore danger. She believed, like many people do, that love deserves effort, even when it hurts. And yet, even with all the signs, even with emotional distance and plans for change, Leah still chose to have the conversation in person. She still gave him the chance to hear her. That's who she was, loyal, measured, and thoughtful. She didn't walk out of people's lives. She gave them time to catch up to the truth. Could this have been prevented? Would a missed text, a rescheduled trip, a last-minute decision to stay home have made a difference? We don't know. But what we do know is this. Leah's story is not just about a crime, it's about a pattern too many ignore. About relationships that become one-sided. About quiet forms of control that escalate into irreversible harm. She deserved more than a headline. She deserved more than a weekend she would never return from. Leah Warren should be here today. That's the reality. That's the grief her family wakes up to every morning. What do you think pushed him over the edge? Jealousy, control, or something deeper? Was this a calculated decision, or a breaking point? We want to hear your thoughts. Was Leah already gone in his mind the moment she considered walking away? Or was it the fear of being left that made him choose silence over separation? If this case left you speechless, take a moment to leave a comment below. Tell us what stood out to you. What could have made a difference? What warning signs do you think were missed? Don't forget to hit like if you found this story important, and subscribe to True Crime Dossier for more in-depth cases that deserve to be told with care, accuracy, and attention to detail. Until next time, stay safe, and always trust your instincts.